We watched her strip cracklings straight from the rendering pot with bare hands, hissing against the heat, and you never asked why. You just watched until you knew. That silence was the lesson. Here are 30 homemade soul food snacks from the 70s that have completely disappeared. Cracklings were never a planned snack. They were a consequence of doing something else. Rendering lard was a fall and winter task in black households across the rural South, a way of preserving hog fat that went back long before the 19th century. The fat was cut into small cubes and cooked low and slow in a cast iron pot until the moisture cooked out and the fat rendered clear. What remained after the liquid fat was poured off was a small, dense, crispy chunk of skin and fat that had concentrated everything into something intensely savory. In West African cooking traditions, fried pork rinds had deep roots. Enslaved Africans brought those culinary instincts to the American South, and the crackling became embedded in black foodways from Virginia down to Louisiana. Salted immediately and eaten still warm from the pot, cracklings carried a richness that cooled into something different. Still good, but not the same. The rendering process has almost entirely vanished from home kitchens. Nobody keeps a pot going for hours anymore. The cracklings that came from it vanished with the practice. Deviled eggs at a family gathering were never just deviled eggs. They were a statement. Whoever set that platter down had made a decision about who she was in that kitchen and in that community. The filling in African American households through the 1960s and 70s was rarely the plain mustard and mayonnaise version that appeared on church potluck tables elsewhere. It ran hotter. Vinegar-laced hot sauce went into the yolk mixture alongside the mustard and a little sweet relish, and the paprika on top was not decorative. It was a seasoning shaken on with intention. The eggs were served ice cold because she had made them the night before. Children knew not to touch the platter until the adults had taken theirs. The hierarchy of who got to the table first and what was still there when you arrived was a lesson in family structure that nobody ever explained out loud. You just absorbed it by watching, the same way you absorbed everything worth knowing in those kitchens. Fried green tomatoes in these kitchens were not a Southern nostalgia dish. They were a practical answer to tomatoes that weren't going to make it to red before the first frost. Every black household that kept a kitchen garden understood the math. The tomatoes left on the vine when September turned cold were either going to be picked green and cooked or lost. Sliced a 1/4 inch thick, salted, dredged in seasoned cornmeal, sometimes with a little flour mixed in for a lighter crust, and fried in a thin coat of oil or drippings until the cornmeal turned golden and the tomato softened inside without going to mush. The tart, almost grassy flavor of the underripe tomato against the savory crust made something that tasted like the end of summer in a single bite. By the time the film came out in 1991 and restaurants started putting fried green tomatoes on every menu, the dish had been in black Southern kitchens for well over a century, dressed up with neither story nor apology. The peanut has West African roots so deep that enslaved Africans called it by its Gullah name, goober, long before any American cookbook caught up. Boiled peanuts, salted in the shell, were a roadside and home staple across the rural South, made by loading raw green peanuts into a pot of heavily salted water and cooking them for 2 to 5 hours until the shells went soft and the nuts inside turned creamy and dense. The salt worked its way through the shell, and the finished nut had a texture, nothing like the roasted kind, yielding, almost starchy, with the salt hitting every bite. Sold from pots at the roadside from Georgia to Louisiana, boiled peanuts in the African American community carried a lineage that stretched back to West Africa, where groundnuts were boiled and seasoned in similar ways. You pulled the shell apart over the pot to catch the brine before it dripped. You ate standing, usually near the pot, because sitting down implied you were done, and nobody was done after just a few. The roadside pots still show up in parts of the Deep South. The ones kept going on the back of the stove at home have mostly gone cold. Pimento cheese got called the pate of the South by food writers who discovered it late, but in black households across North Carolina and Virginia, it had been the thing you put on crackers on a Friday afternoon since at least the 1930s. Homemade pimento cheese was nothing like the tub from the grocery store. It started with sharp cheddar, grated by hand, not pre-shredded, because pre-shredded cheese had a coating that kept it from binding right. The pimentos were the jarred kind, drained and chopped fine. Mayonnaise, Dukes if you were in the Carolinas and the brand mattered, held it together along with a hit of cayenne and sometimes a small amount of cream cheese for body. The ratio was a matter of deep personal conviction, and households did not agree on it. Served on saltine crackers, it was an afternoon snack, a party spread, a thing you made when company was coming and you needed something fast and real. The grocery store version replaced the homemade one, not because it tasted better, it didn't, but because it was already there when you opened the refrigerator. Fried bologna was an after-school institution that required no advanced planning and no trip to the store. It was already there, in the meat drawer, waiting. A thick slice from a bologna roll, scored around the edges so it wouldn't cut when it hit the heat, dropped into a dry skillet over medium-high until the bottom blistered and browned, then flipped once. Yellow mustard on white bread, the fried slice laid on top, sometimes a little hot sauce if you were old enough to reach it. The whole process took 4 minutes. Bologna, mechanically processed pork and beef, was one of the most affordable proteins in black households throughout the 1960s and 70s, a Depression-era staple that had never entirely left the refrigerator. Children who came home to an empty house knew how to make it without being taught. The skillet was there, the bologna was there, the bread was there. It required nothing but presence and hunger, which children had in reliable supply every day at 3:15. Sugar cane wasn't a snack you asked for. It appeared when someone came back from the right place with a stalk tucked under their arm. In Louisiana, Mississippi, and parts of Georgia and South Carolina, where cane was still grown through the 1970s, a length of sugar cane cut from the field and carried home was understood by every child in the household without explanation. You stripped the outer skin with a knife or your teeth if you didn't have one, bit down into the pale inner stalk and chewed out the sweetness. The juice was cool and green sweet and tasted like nothing else. Not candy, not fruit, something more fundamental than either. West African agricultural traditions had brought sugar cane cultivation knowledge to the American South through enslaved people, and the practice of eating raw cane predated the sugar industry itself. The cane fields have contracted dramatically since the 1970s, and the casual access to a fresh stalk that rural children once took for granted has become rare enough that most people under 40 have never tasted it. The jar sat on the counter for weeks, and you knew what was in it before you got close enough to read anything. Pickled eggs were a staple of black household pantries and country stores across the South. Hard-boiled eggs put up in vinegar brine, sometimes plain, sometimes with beet juice that turned the whites deep purple, sometimes spiced with hot peppers and garlic that made the contents run hot. The longer they sat, the deeper the brine penetrated until a 3-week egg tasted almost entirely of the liquid it had been sitting in. at rural general stores in black communities from the Reconstruction era through the 1970s. A jar of pickled eggs next to the cash register was as standard as a jar of pickled pig's feet. The practice of preserving eggs in brine runs through West African food traditions and through the foodways of enslaved people who needed to extend protein through weeks when nothing fresh was available. The counter jars are gone now. The practice went with them. In a house with a wood stove, roasted peanuts were a winter project that happened almost by accident. Raw peanuts in the shell went into a dry cast iron pan set near the edge of the stove where the heat was steady but not direct, and every few minutes someone turned them, not with a spoon, just a shake of the pan, the shells clicking against the cast iron in a sound that meant a cold afternoon was about to get better. The shells went from pale to dry paper to faint golden brown, and you tested one. The nut should be fully roasted but not dark, with a dry snap and a flavor that was nothing like raws. Families gathered near the stove in the winter months, not only for warmth, but for everything that got cooked and passed around there. The roasted peanuts were part of that gathering without being the point of it. She sat nearest the stove and did the turning. When she was gone, nobody moved her chair closer to the stove in winter. It just stayed where it was. Fried skillet corn was what happened when the summer gave you more corn than the pot could take. Fresh corn, cut from the cob, cut close to get the milk too, dragging the back of the knife down the cob after the kernels were off, went into a cast iron skillet with bacon drippings and cooked until the natural sugars caramelized and the kernels took on edges that were almost crisp while the center stayed sweet. Salt, black pepper, sometimes a little onion. The bacon drippings were kept in a coffee can next to the stove, collected from every morning's bacon and used for everything that needed fat and flavor in one move. In African American households across the South during the 1950s and 60s, the drippings can was as standard as the salt shaker, and the cooking that came from it had a depth that vegetable oil never replaced. Fried skillet corn appeared at fish fries and family dinners as a side that people ate until it was gone. The corn is still available. The drippings can is mostly gone from the stove. So is the version of this dish that required it. But if skillet corn was about summer abundance, Souse meat was about the discipline of using everything and wasting nothing. Souse was made from the parts of the hog that remained after the better cuts had been claimed. The ears, the snout, sometimes the feet, all boiled down until the collagen-rich cooking liquid gelled on its own when chilled. The meat was pulled from the bones, seasoned hard with vinegar, black pepper, sage, and crushed red pepper, packed into a loaf pan and waited overnight until it sliced clean. Eaten cold on white bread with yellow mustard and a slice of raw onion, it had a savory, dense quality that divided eaters into those who had grown up with it and those who had not. Souse had been a hog butchering day tradition in black households since before the Civil War, a practice rooted in the necessity of preserving and using the whole animal. The butchering days are gone. The souse that came from them is nearly gone too. Pickled pig's feet occupied a specific and unambiguous position in the black household pantry. They were not Sunday food, not company food, not holiday food. They were Tuesday afternoon food, or what appeared next to the cash register at a country store and cost 35 cents in 1968. The feet were split, cleaned, and simmered in heavily spiced vinegar brine with bay leaves, black peppercorns, mustard seed, and dried red pepper until the connective tissue softened. Put up in mason jars, they lasted for months. The ritual of eating them, pulling the meat from around the joint, the sharp vinegar hit followed by the fat and the spice, was entirely unself-conscious in the kitchens where it belonged. West African food traditions had long incorporated preserved and spiced animal extremities, and the pickled pig's foot carried that lineage forward through the centuries. The store jars still exist. The homemade version is nearly gone. Salmon patties were the answer to a tight week that still needed to feel like a real meal. Canned salmon, the pink kind, not the fancy red, was the protein backbone of black kitchens from the 1940s through the 70s, affordable even when everything else had gone up. The bones went in too, mashed soft and invisible, carrying calcium nobody called calcium. They just called it not wasting anything. Breadcrumbs or crushed crackers bound the patties along with egg, diced onion, and a shake of hot sauce. Cast iron, medium heat, a thin coat of oil. The patties went in and stayed put until the bottom set into a crust the color of dark honey. Flipped once, finished, served with white rice and whatever green was in the pot. She made them on Fridays without fail for 40 years. After she stopped cooking, nobody in the family made salmon patties again. It wasn't that they couldn't, it was that the Friday didn't feel the same anymore, and nobody wanted to sit still with that. Potted meat on crackers was the lunch that came from small tins stacked in pantry corners, affordable protein requiring no refrigeration or cooking. The pinkish paste was spread across saltines, each assembled carefully to stretch the tin as far as possible. Children ate them in sequence, the salty crunch giving way to soft, vaguely meaty filling that tasted like survival itself. Potted meat cost pennies and lasted months on shelves, making it reliable when fresh food was out of reach. Mothers packed these crackers in napkins, sending children to school with humble but filling lunches. The taste was distinctive, slightly metallic, but satisfying in ways only necessity could explain. The small tins represented ingenuity, turning shelf-stable ingredients into meals that kept families fed through the hardest weeks. Bean sandwiches emerged from pots of pinto or navy beans that had simmered all day, the leftovers mashed and spread across bread the next afternoon. Mothers scooped soft beans onto slices of white bread, sometimes adding onion or hot sauce for flavor. The beans provided protein and fiber and filling children's bellies with nutrients that sustained them through school. This was honest and nourishing food, using every bit of the previous night's dinner. The texture was thick and earthy, the taste familiar to children raised on beans as a staple. In black households where dried beans cost almost nothing, this sandwich made practical sense. Kids ate them, understanding that leftovers were not waste, but opportunity. Bean sandwiches represented the philosophy that good food did not require money, only creativity and care. Ketchup sandwiches emerged when refrigerators held nothing but condiments and hope, turning a squeeze bottle into the main course. 2 slices of bread with ketchup spread across them became lunch for children whose families had stretched every dollar past its breaking point. The tangy sweetness gave flavor where none existed, and the red spread looked almost cheerful against pale bread. Kids learned to accept these without complaint because something was better than nothing. Mothers handed them over with quiet resolve, knowing tomorrow might bring better meals. The ketchup provided vitamins and enough taste to make bread worth chewing. There was an unspoken code that no one mocked another child's lunch because everyone had eaten ketchup sandwiches at some point. These meals represented the thin line between hunger and survival. Benny wafers came from a knowledge system that survived the Middle Passage. Benny is the Wolof word for sesame, and enslaved West Africans brought Benny seeds to the South Carolina Lowcountry, planting them in small plots and using them in ways rooted in their home continent. The seeds were toasted in a dry pan until golden and smelling like sweet butter, stirred into a thin batter of brown sugar, butter, flour, and egg, dropped by the spoonful onto a greased tin, and baked until they spread into wide, lacy wafers, thin enough at the edges to nearly see through, with a caramel bite that the toasted sesame deepened into something ancient. In Charleston, Gullah women sold Benny wafers at the city market for generations, one of the earliest documented forms of African American street food commerce in the United States. Today, they appear in specialty stores and food heritage cookbooks, but the ones that mattered were baked in a small kitchen by someone who knew the seeds had to be toasted exactly right and who had been taught that by someone who no longer needed to be told. If Benny wafers were about ceremony, Chow was about practicality raised to art. Made when the garden gave more than anyone could eat. Green tomatoes, cabbage, onion, hot peppers, chopped fine and cooked down in spiced vinegar brine. Chow was a pickling tradition documented in African American kitchens across the Deep South since at least the 1800s. Every family had their ratio. Some ran sweet, some ran hot, some used brown sugar and cayenne in the same jar. It went up in mason jars stacked on a shelf, and when the crackers came out, the Chow came out with them. A spoonful on a saltine with a piece of sharp cheddar was an entire afternoon handled. Children who saw it in the 1970s thought it was just a condiment. Adults knew it was engineering. The jars are still in some pantries. The hands that filled them are not. Nobody sat down for fried okra at the fish fry. You grabbed a paper bag of it and walked. That was the whole point. The okra was sliced into rounds, salted, dredged in seasoned cornmeal, and dropped into the same oil that had just finished the fish, which meant it came out carrying a ghost of that flavor. The cornmeal crust sealed the slime inside and gave you a snap when you bit through it. You reached into the grease-spotted bag without looking and ate them one at a time, hot enough to be careful. Fried okra at fish fries and church suppers across the rural South had been happening in some form since okra, an African vegetable carried to the South by enslaved people from West and Central Africa, first hit a cast iron skillet. Okra was documented in American cookbooks as early as the 1830s, but the paper bag fish fry version never made it into any cookbook. It was made at events, passed around hot, and eaten standing up. It stopped when the fish fries started buying packaged snacks instead of making their own. Cheese straws were the snack that separated serious cooks from everyone else, and serious cooks knew it. They looked simple, strips of spiced cheddar dough baked until crisp, but the technique had opinions. The cheese had to be grated fine, not coarse. The dough had to be cold before it went into the oven. The cayenne was not optional, and it was not a small amount. A proper cheese straw had heat that arrived a full second after the first bite. At church, potlucks, and holiday gatherings across the South, cheese straws appeared in wax paper-lined tins near the deviled eggs. The woman who made them never announced she'd brought them. She just set them down. The tin was empty in 20 minutes, which was the only review that mattered. In African-American homes in Georgia and the Carolinas, cheese straws went into Christmas tins alongside tea cakes and molasses cookies, a tradition documented in Southern Black household cooking going back at least to the 1920s. When she stopped making them, the Christmas tin stayed empty. Before there was a bag of sweet potato chips at the store, there was a steady knife and a pot of hot oil. Homemade sweet potato chips were thin, paper thin if she was good, and they went straight from the raw slice into the fat. The sugar in the sweet potato caramelized against the heat before the slice had time to cook through, which meant the chip came out brittle at the edges with a slight chew at the center. Salted immediately while the surface was still tacky. There was no written recipe, just the knowledge of what thickness held in the oil and what thickness burned, knowledge that lived in the hand and eye. Sweet potatoes had been central to African American foodways since the colonial period, a crop with West African roots that enslaved people cultivated across the South. The chip version never made it into any cookbook. It just got made, passed around still warm, and eventually stopped being made. Leftover sweet potatoes mashed on bread became lunch when holiday cooking produced more than families could eat at once. The sweet potatoes, already baked and soft, were spread across bread like butter, their natural sweetness eliminating the need for additional sugar. Children ate these sandwiches knowing they were tasting something special. Sweet potatoes being more expensive than regular potatoes, the texture was smooth and the flavor was comforting, carrying memories of holiday tables into ordinary school days. Mothers made these lunches from abundance rather than scarcity, proving that stretching food worked in both directions. Sweet potato sandwiches connected children to celebration even when eating alone at cafeteria tables. The orange filling reminded them that their families found ways to provide. Sorghum popcorn balls were a winter project, which meant they were a group project. Sorghum, a grain indigenous to West Africa, brought to the South by enslaved people and sometimes called guinea corn, went into the pot with butter and cooked to the softball stage. You tested it the old way, a drop in cold water, rolled between your fingers. If it held a ball, it was ready. Popcorn went into a bowl. The hot syrup poured over and stirred fast, and then everyone grabbed a handful and started rolling quickly before it set. The trick was wet hands and palm pressure, not finger pressure, because fingers left dents and palms made a smooth ball. Children who helped ate half before they ever made it to the plate, sticky-handed and unrepentant. She started making them the first cold weekend every November. The smell of sorghum cooking was how you knew winter was real. There was a last batch somewhere in the early 1980s. Nobody knew at the time that it was the last one. And if sorghum popcorn balls were a home kitchen project, pralines were something closer to a calling. In 19th century New Orleans, free black women known as pralinières sold pralines from flat baskets in the French Quarter, one of the earliest independent food enterprises in American history run by black women. The homemade version traveled north and inland with the Great Migration, carried as memory rather than paper. Brown sugar, butter, heavy cream, and pecans went into a heavy pot and cooked to the softball stage, 234 to 240 degrees, though the thermometer was often optional if you knew the sound and color. Pulled from heat and beaten with a wooden spoon until it turned opaque and grainy creamy, then dropped by the spoonful onto wax. Paper to cool. Each praline was different. Some ran thin and glassy, some set thick and sandy. And the difference was in the beating and the timing and the weather, which affected how the sugar crystallized. She said humidity on the day changed everything. She was right, and nobody wrote down how she compensated for it. Horehound candy was the kind of thing that made you understand the difference between what tasted good and what was good for you. And in a certain era, those two things were not kept separate. Horehound is an herb with a bitter medicinal flavor, and the hard candy made from it was part of the healing pantry as much as the snack shelf. A cough remedy, a throat soother, a thing the deacon kept in his coat pocket during winter services and passed to children between hymns. Made by boiling horehound tea, brewed from dried leaves of the plant grown in kitchen gardens across the South, with sugar and corn syrup to the hard cracked stage poured onto a greased pan and broken once cooled. The flavor was strange to anyone who hadn't grown up with it. Bitter up front, then a slow sweetness, then something almost cool at the back of the throat. African American herbalists had kept Horehound in their gardens since the antebellum period. The plant is still findable. The coat pockets that held the candy, the cold church pews, the January Sundays, those are gone and they are not coming back. Crackling bread was born on hog killing day when families rendered lard from pork fat and the crispy bits left behind, cracklings, were folded straight into cornbread batter. The cracklings gave the bread a crunch plain cornbread never had, little pockets of salt and pork fat that burst between your teeth. This wasn't something learned from a book. You stood next to whoever worked the stove, watching her crumble the cracklings with her fingers, judging the batter's thickness by sight. Through the 1940s and 50s in the rural South, hog killing meant every part of the animal fed somebody, and crackling bread was how the smallest scraps ended up on the table tasting richer than anything store-bought. Kids tore off corners still warm from the cast iron, eating it plain or crumbled into potlikker. The bread kept for days, growing denser with each one.
Hot water. Cornbread fritters were the quick answer to hunger when a hearty snack was needed before supper or after school. Cooks stirred boiling water into seasoned cornmeal, forming a thick dough that could be shaped into small patties with a spoon. Dropped into a skillet of hot bacon drippings, the fritters sizzled and browned within minutes, filling the room with a toasty aroma that made waiting difficult. The crust formed a crisp shell while the inside stayed tender and warm. Children often burned their fingers snatching them from the pan before they cooled, eager to taste the smoky corn flavor. These fritters paired perfectly with a drizzle of cane syrup or a slice of fresh tomato when gardens were plentiful. They proved that simple ingredients and a hot stove could create pure comfort faster than any fancy recipe. Today, the memory of that first crunchy bite still lives wherever people remember the sound of cornmeal meeting hot iron.
Peanut butter was cheap, flour was cheaper, and when you rolled one inside the other with powdered sugar and dropped it into hot oil, you had something that tasted like it cost 10 times what it did. Fried peanut butter balls appeared in black households during the 1940s and 50s when George Washington Carver's work at Tuskegee Institute had pushed the peanut across the South and jars sat in pantries from rural Georgia to Harlem. The balls were simple, peanut butter mixed stiff with powdered sugar, rolled small, dipped in light batter, and fried until the coating crackled. Inside, the peanut butter melted into something almost molten, sticking to the roof of your mouth. Church women packed them into tins for bake sales where a dozen sold for a dime. The trick was speed, 30 seconds too long, and the filling turned bitter. Only the ones who had fried them 100 times got it right, and they never told you the secret was oil temperature, not the clock. Peanut butter and jelly on saltine crackers was what happened when the bread ran out, but hunger didn't. You spread peanut butter on one cracker, grape jelly on the other, pressed them together, and hoped it held. It rarely did. The saltine snapped under the weight, and you'd eat the whole thing in pieces, licking your fingers between bites. But the salt cut through the sweet jelly in a way soft bread never managed. In the 1960s, a box of saltines cost 15 cents and peanut butter ran about a quarter, making this one of the cheapest protein snacks a mother could stock. Kids ate these after school, before dinner, and sometimes instead of dinner when weeks ran long. Crackers stayed crisp for weeks. Peanut butter didn't need the icebox, and the jelly lasted until the jar was scraped clean with a spoon. Long before snacks came in plastic wrappers, they came from the same pot that fed the family.
Buttermilk cornbread sticks brought the smell of hot iron and sweet corn to countless African-American kitchens, where cast iron molds shaped each piece into crisp-edged fingers perfect for dipping. The batter of stone-ground cornmeal, tangy buttermilk, and a little lard was poured into sizzling molds so the edges crackled as soon as they touched the heat. Children loved pulling the golden sticks apart, steam rising as they slathered honey butter across the ridges. They were the ideal companion to collard greens or a simple bowl of beans, hearty enough to stand alone as a snack when money was scarce. Street vendors sold them wrapped in newspaper at church homecomings, and neighbors traded secrets about which cornmeal gave the best crunch. The sound of batter meeting hot iron became a music of its own, echoing through small kitchens on quiet evenings. Today, these molds often sit forgotten in cupboards, but a warm cornbread stick still delivers a taste of the past that is both humble and magnificent.
When bananas turned black on the counter, too soft for slicing, too sweet for anything sensible, that was exactly when they became perfect. Fried banana fritters took overripe fruit and turned it into something golden, crisp, and impossibly rich. Mashed into batter with flour, a beaten egg, sugar, and cinnamon, then dropped in rounds into hot lard. The natural sugars caramelized against the oil, creating edges that crackled into the warm center. Caribbean influence ran deep. Plantain fritter versions existed across the islands, and as families from Jamaica and Trinidad settled in southern port cities during the 1940s and 50s, those recipes merged with African American frying traditions already old. Some cooks added vanilla. Others drizzled brown sugar dissolved in butter over the top. The whole thing cost almost nothing and used fruit headed for the trash, resourceful and indulgent in the same bite. Cinnamon sugar toast was the first snack most black kids learned to make alone, standing on a chair to reach the counter. The bread had to be white and soft enough to hold the butter without tearing. You spread it thick all the way to the edges because bare corners were unacceptable. Then came the cinnamon and sugar from a jar that lived next to the stove, the ratio known only to whoever filled it. The toast went under the broiler, never in a toaster, and you watched through the oven door until the sugar bubbled and the edges turned dark gold. You ate it standing up, burning your fingers, licking the grit off your thumb. It cost pennies, took 3 minutes, and the smell alone could pull every kid in the house out of hiding. Nobody sells it, nobody orders it, but that smell takes you straight back to a kitchen where the oven was always warm.
Pickled watermelon rind chips turned what many considered scraps into a chewy, sweet tart treat that brightened long summer afternoons. After the red flesh was eaten, thrifty cooks peeled the green skin and cut the pale rind into thin strips. These were simmered in a syrup of vinegar, sugar, and spices until translucent, then laid out to dry slightly for a texture somewhere between fruit leather and candied peel. The result was a snack both refreshing and delightfully surprising, a clever way to honor every part of the harvest. Children carried jars of the glossy slices to picnics, where their tangy bite cut through the heat. Neighbors traded jars as gifts, each household claiming its own secret spice blend. The chips lasted for weeks in a cool pantry, offering a taste of summer long after the first frost. Today, they remain a testament to creativity and respect for the land, proof that nothing in a watermelon need ever be wasted.
If those peach pies belonged to summer, fried apple turnovers owned the fall. The apples were always dried, never fresh. Dried fruit concentrated the flavor into something candy-like and held together without turning to mush. Families sliced their own from backyard trees each September, stringing them above the wood stove to cure. The dough was simple: flour, lard, salt, cold water, rolled thin and cut with the rim of a coffee cup. A spoonful of stewed apples in the center, edges crimped with a fork, and the whole thing slid into lard so hot it sealed the crust on contact. You never pierced the dough before frying. A single hole meant the filling leaked and the oil went dark. Kids learned that rule before they learned to read. These traveled in coat pockets to school, in baskets to church, in paper sacks to funerals. Before lunch, money was a guarantee. Syrup sandwiches filled the gap between hunger and the next real meal. 2 slices of white bread, a heavy pour of Cairo syrup or dark cane syrup, pressed together and wrapped in wax paper for school. The bread went soft and sticky within minutes, part of the appeal for little hands that like pulling it apart in sweet, doughy strings. In the 1950s, a bottle of Cairo cost less than 20 cents and stretched across a week of snacks for 3 or 4 kids. Dark syrup carried a caramel note with a faint bitterness that balanced the sweetness. Light was milder, preferred by the younger ones. No one bragged about eating syrup sandwiches. It was the kind of snack made quietly on afternoons when the icebox held nothing else. But decades later, grown men and women speak of it with something close to reverence because that sandwich meant somebody made sure you didn't go without.
Peanut brittle with sorghum was the kind of candy that snapped between your teeth and stuck in your memory long after the last piece was gone. Farm families boiled sorghum syrup until it bubbled thick and dark, its grassy sweetness richer than plain sugar. Roasted peanuts were stirred in quickly, the hot mixture poured across buttered pans and spread thin with the back of a spoon. Children waited wide-eyed as the candy cooled, eager to crack off shiny amber shards that caught the light like stained glass. Revival gatherings and county fairs always had a table piled high with these sweet, brittle sheets, often wrapped in wax paper tied with string. The sorghum not only gave a deeper flavor, but also reflected the ingenuity of cooks who relied on what they could grow rather than expensive, refined sugar. Each bite carried the flavor of late summer fields and long evenings under oil lamps. To taste it again would be to remember the easy companionship of neighbors sharing stories while the brittle snapped between happy hands.
Fried bread pudding squares took the waste nothing rule and turned it into a dessert so good that families saved bread on purpose. Day-old slices were soaked in custard of eggs, milk, sugar, vanilla, and cinnamon until swelled soft, then pressed into a pan and chilled firm. Cut thick and fried in hot lard, the outside developed a caramelized shell while the inside stayed creamy and custard rich. Church suppers across the South in the 1950s and 60s featured trays of these stacked and dusted with powdered sugar, sitting beside pound cakes and cobblers but disappearing first. The dish had roots in French and Caribbean bread pudding traditions that arrived through New Orleans, then adapted into something fried because in those kitchens, if it could be fried, it would be. What other households called trash, these cooks called the start of dessert. But years before those skillet desserts reached the holiday table, something simpler was feeding families along the Texas-Louisiana border. The dough puffed the instant it hit the oil, ballooning into a hollow pillow so light it nearly floated. Frozen Kool-Aid cups turned a 5-cent packet of drink mix into a summer business that kept entire blocks buzzing. Every neighborhood had a house where somebody's mama filled Dixie cups with Kool-Aid, stuck in popsicle sticks, and sold them off the porch for a dime. Cherry was the best seller, grape ran second, tropical punch was for the bold. You mixed it stronger than the packet said, doubled the sugar, poured slow so the stick stayed centered while the cups froze overnight. By noon, kids lined up on the sidewalk with coins earned sweeping porches or returning bottles. The trick was peeling the cup without breaking the ice. Squeeze just right, let the edges give, pull the paper down in one strip. Some bit straight through, others licked slow, letting the color stain their lips purple for hours. It was a childhood economy built on sugar, ice, and 5-cent packets, and every kid on the block knew exactly which house had the coldest cups.
Molasses pull candy turned an ordinary evening into a celebration of sticky fun and family patience. Thick molasses was boiled until it reached a glossy stage, then poured onto buttered pans to cool just enough for handling. Children and adults buttered their hands and began the long, rhythmic process of pulling and folding the warm candy until it turned a light golden color and grew chewy. The sweet strands stretched like ribbons, twisting into shapes that hardened into bite-sized treats once cooled. Autumn was the favorite season for this ritual, when cool air helped the candy set and neighbors gathered for the show. The smell of molasses clung to clothing and hair, a sugary perfume that marked a good night well spent. Every piece carried a hint of smoke from the kettle and a memory of shared laughter. Modern kitchens rarely see such slow, hands-on candy making, but those who remember know the pull of tradition is as strong as the candy itself.
These kitchens went quiet, but the memory of what came out of them hasn't. Leave the name of yours below